CBT Nuggets, Juniper Network Certified Specialist Security, or from this point known as JNCIS SEC. Hi there, my name is Michael Shannon, and if you were in my JNCIA series, let me just cordially welcome you back into the Juniper universe, or maybe I should call it the Juniverse. All right. And if you know what, this is your first time to have a nugget with me, or maybe your first Juniper nugget, let me just say, hey, welcome. This is going to be a very exciting series. We're really in my wheelhouse. I love security, it's my passion. And I'm really looking forward to delivering this very important and very powerful appliance, the SRX. So what we're going to do in this first nugget is we're just going to kind of get our feet wet. We're going to cover a little bit of history, maybe a survey of the different devices out there, the SRX series product line, where the SRX came from, Screen OS. So some really cool things. So whether you're here to pass this exam, which is pretty tough, or whether you're here just to kind of get rapidly deployed with the SRX appliance in your small to medium-sized business, your branch office, your remote office, you're going to learn all you need to know to hit the ground running with the Juniper SRX. All right, let's dive in. Now, if we ask ourselves why we're here, let's don't kid ourselves. We're here because it's all about the firewall. We're here to learn about implementing a Juniper firewall. And we'll talk in a second about the location or the areas we're going to be deploying this firewall. But we need to define what a firewall is. And honestly, the word itself defines what it is. It is to keep a fire from spreading. Okay? And it's to keep that fire from spreading from one domain to another. Okay? So we have two domains here, and this could be two compartments on a ship. This could be two areas of a forest, right? And this is a forest road, a cleared out area. It could be in a building. We're trying to keep the fire, which is in here, from spreading into this area. So it is a firewall. That's what it is. And you put bricks in here, okay? Pink Floyd, another brick in the wall. So it's a firewall, but traditionally firewalls were really just packet filtering or static packet filtering daemons that ran on Unix boxes. And so their main goals were to use access control list or access control rules to basically permit and deny traffic from one domain to another, from one zone to another. But we've gone well beyond that. Now what we're dealing with are firewall systems. So when we talk about a firewall, we're talking about a system, and it can mean a lot of different things. I mean, the word firewall is kind of like defining what a cloud is. We hear so much about cloud services now, and you can hear so many different definitions, okay? This device right here could just be a router running some type of software, like I said, like a Unix daemon, for example. It could be done on a switch. You could have a switch, which we talked about this in my JNCIA series, but on your switch, you could use VLANs or even more granular private VLANs. And you could create separation between the ports on this switch logically into VLAN 10 and VLAN 20. And so that logical partition itself could be creating a firewall between two broadcast domains or between two virtual LANs. Okay? What nowadays what we really look at is a complex system that integrates a wide variety of features and components. Okay, so we've really, as we initially had the kind of access control rules or ACLs, which were just statements that permitted or denied traffic, we kind of migrated or evolved into, more advanced features like stopping IP address spoofing, people who were trying to masquerade, coming in from the outside into our network, trying to masquerade as a valid host inside of our network, different denial of service attacks, and really kind of leveraging a lot of the behavior of layer 3 IP and layer 4 TCP and UDP, because these are very user-friendly promiscuous protocols. They have features that make them interoperable, and they make internetworking and connections available so they can be easily compromised. Okay, they're a little bit naive, let's put it that way. But we need to have that behavior to have our connectivity over internetworks. ICMP protocol also be taken advantage of, different types of attacks there. So we, built in software systems and eventually hardware systems to stop a lot of this stuff. And then they even evolved further to help provide the CIA security triad. We can involve crypto systems to give us confidentiality. We can encrypt or decrypt. They have the ability to do digital signing and to be certificate servers, to provide integrity with SHA-1 and MD5 hashing and message authentication codes, and to provide availability so we didn't get brought down by denial of service attack, for example, and much, much more. Moving up the OSI stack. When we move above layer 4, we've got the session, presentation, and application layer here, layer 7, which is really combined all into the application layer. Well, we can do much more. And so one thing we have to remember is that a firewall system really has to itself be resistant to attack. So it has to have some protection mechanisms to protect the protector, right? If this is a device that kind of stands protecting two different domains, well, malicious users or crackers will be trying to attack that device itself. Okay, so these denial of service attacks, these flooding attacks, these spoofing attacks, they may be targeted at the firewall itself. Okay, malicious code on the firewall itself. So it has to be resistant to attacks itself in order to protect the servers and hosts behind it in this particular zone or domain here. It also needs to be the only ingress and egress point between domains and zones. So the firewall system, there shouldn't be a way to get around it. Okay, you shouldn't be able to circumvent the firewall system. All inbound and outbound traffic, all ingress and egress traffic should have to go through the firewall system in some way or another. And it's the primary goal of a firewall system, and it's often the first thing you acquire in your security budget. It's the primary security policy enforcement mechanism, or FLOD. It's your first line of defense. Okay, so that's really what we're here for. And what we're here for in this entire course, this Nugget series, is the much more. Okay, yeah, we're going to talk about all the fundamental things that it does, including dynamic packet filtering and beyond. But we're going to look at much more because these newer firewall systems are now integrated all-in-one devices. Okay, and that didn't always used to be the case. Now, back in the aughts or the zeros or whatever you want to call that decade, right? Back then, when we wanted to put together a firewall system, it was kind of like assembling the Avengers. Maybe you saw that movie. A pretty good movie. If you think about it, and this is, most of us who get into Juniper security, either we're getting into it fresh, okay? We're just, we're new to the technology, new to security, or most of us are coming from a Cisco background. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, most of the engineers, early engineers of Juniper, were Cisco people. Okay, so there's no secret there. But if we look at a Cisco environment and we look at firewall systems before 8 to 10 years ago, it was like assembling a team. So for example, you would have the Hulk, and the Hulk would be your static packet filter. And Iron Man, Iron Man could go a little bit further, so he would be your dynamic packet filter, or what we call stateful. You would have, separate proxy servers, like this guy. I forgot his name. Okay, Samuel L. Jackson, I know that for sure. Proxy servers or application layer gateways. Okay, they were very protocol specific, and usually they were web servers, right? We would cache web pages. We would say you can go to this website or not go to this website. And here's your intrusion detection service, your IDS, which back in the day was basically a Unix box, probably running something like Snort. And then of course you might have your VPN, your site-to-site VPN, your remote access VPN. So this would be from a Cisco standpoint, this would be a separate box, a VPN concentrator or some other vendor's VPN gateway device. The proxy server will be a separate proxy server, maybe some Unix software, maybe even one of Microsoft's proxy server solutions. This, like I said, could be a Unix box, or it could be a dedicated appliance. We started to see dedicated IDS and IPS appliances. Also anomaly detection systems. okay, that used statistical anomaly detection. So it was a wide variety of different services that were usually separate Unix servers or separate appliances like a VPN concentrator, a PIX firewall, and you had to run them, separately, either in line or in parallel along with your layer 2 switching. And it was no kidding, it was a complicated thing to set up, right? Because you could be running these static packet filters on your perimeter edge routers, and then behind that you would have, in a DMZ, or we call it a screened subnet, a wide variety of these services. So it really was kind of that Avengers approach where we had to pull together a team, a collection of software and hardware, okay, to get the firewall system in place. And we still see that to some degree when you get into the enterprise and service provider. They will have separate systems. They'll still have separate IPS systems. They'll still have separate VPN gateways. But what we're talking about here in this particular nugget and in this JNCIS is we're looking at the integrated all-in-one solution, which, by the way, didn't begin with Juniper and didn't begin with Cisco. How about a little bit of history of how we got from kind of the Avengers approach into one superhero? So what are we looking at here? This is a NetScreen 5GT. This is actually a predecessor to the SRX series. It was the legacy Screen OS product. It was first introduced to the market by NetScreen. Now at the time what we had there was a firewall with a base operating system that you would load the firewall software on top of it. And it was flexible. But this integrated Screen OS is what really was the revolutionary thing that came around. The Screen OS just blew away all of the competition, to the point where people like Cisco rapidly had to shift gears and come up with their adaptive security appliance. You ever heard of that? Well, one of the main reasons why the ASA even exists is because of Screen OS, for example, and Juniper kind of taking over and having their first fleet of integrated firewall appliances. Because Cisco would have been happy to sell a separate PIX firewall, a separate VPN concentrator, a separate IPS sensor box, a separate content security box all day long. I mean, they sell hardware. So this is not something they want to do. They were dragged kicking and screaming into this new world. So eventually, though, this NetScreen solution evolved into Juniper's own revolutionary approach to firewall products. And so the Junos operating system became the base OS for their SRX series. So here's an SRX 220, which is what we're really talking about. This is what we're going to be focusing on in this particular Nugget series. Now, again, Junos was created in the mid-90s. It was an offshoot, literally an offshoot of the FreeBSD Unix operating system, or Unix-ish operating system, and basically it did away with the Screen OS operating system. It took a few things from Screen OS, but now we're basically using what's called one Junos. In my JNCIA series, I go into a lot more detail of the actual operating system. And in the upcoming Nugget, we're going to talk about the most important thing that Juniper SRX appliances inherited from Screen OS, and that is the concept of a zone. Okay, and I've got an entire Nugget coming up just on that concept of a zone, because it's very important. And as a matter of fact, speaking of Cisco, it influenced Cisco to get away from their classic firewall into what's called a zone-based policy firewall. And of course, when you're teaching a Cisco course and you're teaching zone-based policy firewall, you're teaching it like, Cisco thought it up, it's their idea, it's this incredible revolution away from the classic firewall system, when the truth of the matter is they also got the concept from Screen OS. Okay, so I've established several things here. Let's establish the next important thing, and that is, okay, we're going to take this all-in-one integrated device, which says a bunch of stuff that we're going to learn about, right? No longer is it the Avengers, it's one superhero. Where in this particular JNCIS SEC certification exam and series, where are we going to be focused on deploying this type of appliance? Well, let's take a look. Okay, this diagram might be a little bit overwhelming, and I'm not trying to blow you out of the water early on. I'm trying to give you a context, okay? Understanding our goal, our real world goals moving forward throughout this Nugget series. Now, obviously, Juniper is going to be very merciful to us, right? This is really the first security certification in their series. So we're going to start out looking at the most logical place that you would deploy if you were just an entry-level security technician or security officer, right? We're not going to start out down here, which you can't even see on the diagram. We're not going to start out down here at the data center or the NOC, the Network Operations Center, which is what this actual connection goes down to. But as you can see up here, here's our headquarters campus. And you can even see we have higher end SRX clusters that we're deploying there. They're using Metro Ethernet, they're using MPLS connectivity over here to another possible data center. This could be across a metropolitan area network to another aspect of their campus. But what are we going to be focusing on? Okay, well, we can see a couple of things right off the bat. We've got a retail site 1 here. So obviously this is a company that is a retailer. All right. We've got retail site 1 here. We have retail site 2 here. And then we have a branch site. Okay. And one thing we can notice that's in common of these three, what we call remote office, branch office, or robo solutions, is that they have an SRX firewall. Okay. Not a high-end firewall either. These are small office, branch offices. You've got a SRX series here. We've got a SRX series here. So in this particular nugget, our goal is to deploy this appliance, this security device, effectively and have a base knowledge of all of the features to be able to deploy this and to go in and rapidly set this up for a retail site or a branch site or a remote office. Okay, that's our goal. Now, as you move forward in your Juniper knowledge, as you move farther into the higher end certification path, then you're going to be looking at campus solutions up here. You'll be looking at data center solutions and network operating system solutions. But in addition to providing, you can see these little icons here, providing anti-spam, antivirus, web filtering, and IPS services, intrusion prevention services, and all the other things that firewalls do that we talked about, these gateways are also going to be SSL VPN gateways possibly, or they'll use IPsec, okay, for site-to-site VPNs, remote access VPNs. Actually, what's over here in the diagram are a bunch of end users with laptops accessing from hotels, with pads of some kind, Microsoft pads, iPads, something that's Android based. You get the idea, right? So what we're focusing on here is how we're going to protect these retail sites, these branch offices, these remote sites with the SRX Security Services Gateway, okay? And that's really what it is. The SRX is officially called the SRX Series Services Gateway. And by the way, the word gateway should be your clue that this thing's going to do routing as well as switching. Okay, that's what gateways are, your default gateway. So if it is a gateway, obviously it's going to support routing protocols, static routing or dynamic routing protocols, as well as having switch ports and other services that are going to be above layer 3 and 4, hence the anti-spam, antivirus, web filtering, all that good stuff. It's pretty exciting though when you think about the ability in one single box to learn all these different aspects of security. It's extremely cool, okay? And it's a much faster and more efficient way to learn all these different services as opposed to the old school methods where we had to learn a VPN gateway here, a firewall here, an IDS sensor here. Maybe you're using different types of operating systems. You're using different underlying Unix boxes or Linux code, different command access, different GUI access. That's not the case here. We're going to be able to use that Junos operating system. And we'll be able to use, if we want to, a single GUI management system as well. So that kind of takes us into what we're going to look at in our next nugget. Is I need to do a quick down and dirty review of the Junos CLI, because I need to get everybody on a level playing field. Okay, you may not be a JNCIA. You may not have taken my Juniper series, the precursor to this. It's not a requirement. You could just dive right in here. But I need to get everybody on a level playing field. So we're going to spend some time in the next nugget taking a look at the fundamentals of the Junos CLI. And if you don't need any of that, you could skip that nugget and go to the next nugget if you wanted to. It won't hurt my feelings one bit. Now, the SRX security gateway is usually and almost always the only security device that's going to be implemented at the remote office or branch office or small office or home office or, as we saw, retail office. And it combines all these features. It combines static packet filtering with stateful firewalls, zone policy, network address translation, IPsec VPNs, screening and filtering, intrusion detection and prevention or IDP through intrusion prevention services, unified threat management, routing capabilities, remember it is a gateway, and transparent mode so it can be just a bump in the wire if you want it to, and high availability solutions. Now, the great thing about this particular JNCIS SEC series is you don't need to invest a lot of money to be able to prepare yourself, because remember, we're using the Junos operating system and it's the same code across all the devices. This is not like Cisco where you would have to learn the iOS IPS or learn the adaptive security appliance firewall operating system or learn IPS operating system, which is different. You don't have that scenario here. And so you can go out and just get you, if you wanted to, just an SRX 100. I've got several options that I can use at my disposal. The SRX 100 is very inexpensive, or maybe an SRX 210H, for example. You don't have to invest more than a few $100s just to get something that you can prepare yourself for this exam and even get the skill set you need to walk into a job environment, okay? Because you'll have all the fundamentals you need. If it's a higher end platform, you can just quickly ramp up over the weekend to find out some of the new features. Really, a lot of it just comes down to port density when it gets right down to it, and modularity, the ability to add more modular solutions for the data center, for WAN connectivity, for some of the larger parts of that topology we saw a while ago. But for our purposes, all we need is an SRX 100. That'll do the trick. And that's really good news, because then we can focus on investing our training budget elsewhere, right? For more advanced training later on, or maybe for some other CBT nuggets, for example, that help fill in some gaps with security, maybe CISSP or something like that. Back in the 80s when I was in my band, I didn't really realize, and neither did my bandmates, when we were writing songs and producing songs, that just by virtue of the fact that we were using, oh, I don't know, kind of drum machine type drum sounds and percussion and lots of reverb and using Oberheim keyboards that, 2 or 3 decades from now, our music would sound totally dated, because obviously we were doing some things that basically dated us, that identified us with a certain era or a certain decade. Yes, I did have a mullet, but back then we didn't call them mullets, right? I mean, come on, Bono had one, so it had to be cool, right? So one thing I'm not going to do in my CBT nuggets, and I try to avoid this, is to do long discussions on the different platform types. Because as soon as you do that and you get graphics and pictures of a lot of different models, it inevitably the company, whether it be Juniper or Cisco or somebody else, will have their new fleet and they'll make something end of life or end of sale. So I don't want to make my nugget ever become like an 80s pop song. So one thing I want you to do is this: go on a little web safari, do a little homework on your own, go to juniper.net, and in the products and services area, you want to go to the security link. And when you click on that, you'll see there's a bunch of different platforms over here, and there's a ton of higher end things that we can apply. There's even a dedicated NetScreen series here, and we'll talk more about that later on. But we want to focus right now at this point in the game on this SRX series, and you can see here that under SRX at this point in time, which is September of 2012, is the low end. We start the SRX 100, which, by the way, there's simply no reason why you couldn't just go get one of these and use this to prep for this exam. It still, has pretty good support. I mean, up to 650 megabit per second firewall and 65 megabit per second IPsec VPN. Not bad. A lot of other features. Now, each one of these has a little demo movie you can watch, and this is actually the network diagram that they use here is actually the same network diagram that I used for my topology. So, kind of prototypical Juniper. But it starts at the 110. Like I said, the 210 is also a very popular option. Here's a picture of it that you see at a branch office, remote office. Then it gets up into the 240 series. These are to get to be 1 RU rack mountable size, okay? So once you get into I think it's the 220, and up, we start to get to that, that rack mountable unit that you would see that would go along with your Juniper router and your Juniper switch and everything else. So then you make the big jump at the 550, which is, very flexible. See, what gets into the higher end devices that compares it to the lower end is not so much the operating system at all. It still runs Junos, but it's basically port density, faster ports, okay? Gigabit speeds, 10 gigabit speeds, modularity. You can add additional port density, other types of modular appliance solutions as well. And so like you can see down here, the supported interfaces, it's a lot more flexible for different implementations. So we get kind of into the enterprise solution up all the way to the top with the SRX 5800 series, which is, just a huge, very similar to what you would see with like a Catalyst 6500 switch with all of its blades and its modularity. So this is the SRX series. And again, like I said, we're focusing entry level down here for the branch, the remote office, the regional branch office, the small office, home office. Because again, we got to walk before we can run. But as you progress through the different certification paths and you get up to professional and then up to expert, obviously we get into bigger and bigger platforms, larger implementations, data center, service provider. But again, one step at a time. So I do want to recommend that you come up to Juniper's website. You may get a question or two on some of these platforms here. I will, at the end of this Nugget series, I will do kind of a test review. So my promise to you is this: if I become aware, wink, of any possible knowledge you might need of specific specs, let's say on the 220, I'll do my best to make sure that you're aware of it. Okay, so keep that in mind. So take some time, go up and visit juniper.net, and don't go to juniper.com. That's going to be like a credit card company or something. But juniper.net, and then go to products and services, and then go to security, and then want to focus right now on the SRX series. All right, well, in this first nugget of the JNCIS SEC series, we really kind of got our feet wet. We answered a very important question: what is a firewall and what is a firewall system? What does it do? It's kind of the reason we're here. A little bit of history. We saw where we kind of came from with NetScreen and ScreenOS, where we got to today with the SRX and One Junos. Then where do we fit in the topology? Okay, we saw a large enterprise domain, and we're going to be focusing, of course, with our solutions here in this JNCIS track. We're going to be focusing on the retail, the branch, the remote office solution. And so some of the features that we'll be using and implementing on our SRX security gateway. Well, I hope this CBT Nugget was informative for you. I want to thank you for viewing.